The audience grew quiet as a small Filipino girl stepped timidly onto the America's Got Talent stage, her bare feet and simple dress a sharp contrast to the glittering lights above her. She looked fragile, almost too young to be standing there, but in her eyes was a fire that spoke of dreams far bigger than her humble beginnings. Simon leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his expression curious but guarded. The girl took a deep breath, and when asked why she had come, she whispered softly that she only wanted to give her family a better life through music. The crowd stirred, some smiling, others doubtful, unsure of what was about to happen. Slowly, she walked toward the grand piano at the center of the stage, her fingers shaking as they hovered above the keys. For a moment, the room felt frozen in anticipation. Then the first notes rang out, gentle and uncertain at first, but gradually they grew stronger, richer, filled with an intensity that seemed far too powerful for her small frame. The melody rose like a tide, carrying the weight of her struggles, nights of hunger, days of sacrifice, and an unshakable love for her family. The audience sat spellbound, many with tears in their eyes, as the little girl poured every ounce of her soul into the music. Even Simon, known for his sharp critiques, leaned forward, his face softening as he realized this was more than talent, it was survival, courage, and heart turned into song. By the time the final note lingered in the air, the theater erupted in thunderous applause, the kind that shakes the very walls. And in that instant, everyone knew they had witnessed something far beyond a performance, they had witnessed hope itself. The final note had barely faded when the little girl slowly lifted her hands from the piano, her chest rising and falling as if she had just poured out her very soul. For a brief, breathtaking moment, the entire theater was silent. No one clapped, no one spoke, everyone was still caught inside the echo of her music. Then, as if a dam had broken, the audience leapt to their feet in a wave of thunderous applause, cheers, and whistles. People wiped away tears, strangers hugged each other, and the judges exchanged glances that carried both shock and admiration. The little girl sat frozen at the piano, her tiny shoulders trembling, eyes wide with disbelief at the storm of love surrounding her. Simon, who so often kept his emotions locked away, leaned forward, his face unusually tender. He let the applause roll on, soaking in the moment before finally standing up. The cameras caught his expression, serious, moved, and almost vulnerable, as he looked directly at her. That, he began slowly, his voice carrying across the theater, was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard. The crowd erupted again, louder than before, but Simon wasn't finished. His hand moved toward the golden buzzer, and the audience realized what was about to happen. The anticipation built, screams filled the air, and the girl gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Then, with a firm slam, Simon pressed it. The iconic golden confetti burst into the air like a shower of dreams, sparkling against the bright lights as it rained down over her. She collapsed into tears, her hands trembling as she tried to catch the falling pieces of gold, as if they were proof that her life was about to change forever. Golden confetti swirled in the air like magic, but for the little girl sitting at the piano, it felt almost unreal. She pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed, as tears streamed down her cheeks. The judges stood in awe, clapping and smiling, but it was Simon's expression that caught everyone's attention, his usual sharpness softened into something deeply human. He leaned forward, and for a moment, he simply studied her as though trying to understand how such raw beauty had emerged from someone so small and unassuming. Then he asked gently, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl sniffled, her voice shaking as she answered. "We didn't have a piano. I used to sneak into the school at night and practice on the old one there. Sometimes the guard would let me in, sometimes I just sat outside, listening to others play and copying the sounds in my head." The theater went silent again, but this time the silence carried the weight of revelation. The audience realized they hadn't just witnessed a performance, they had witnessed the triumph of determination over impossible odds. The little girl wasn't simply gifted. She was a fighter who had turned hunger, loneliness, and hardship into music that could touch the soul. One by one, people in the crowd began to cry, moved not just by her story, but by the strength it took to carry it onto the stage. The judges' smiles faded into something more serious, a recognition of the magnitude of her courage. Simon's voice broke slightly as he said, "You've done more than play the piano tonight. You've reminded us all why we love music, because it comes from the heart." And in that moment, the entire theater understood they were witnessing the birth of something extraordinary. The confetti was still falling when the little girl stood from the piano, wiping her tears, her face glowing with disbelief. The crowd remained on their feet, clapping and cheering as though they couldn't let the moment end. She looked out at the sea of faces, her lips trembling, unable to find words. Simon motioned for the noise to quiet, and when the applause softened, he spoke with a gravity rarely heard in his voice. "You've just created one of the most unforgettable moments in this show's history," he said, his eyes fixed on her. The girl pressed her hands over her chest, shaking her head as though she still couldn't believe it was real. Then Howie leaned forward, his voice warm and fatherly. "Do you understand what you just did? You touched millions of hearts tonight." The girl's tears spilled again, and she whispered into the microphone, "I just wanted to make my family proud." That simple sentence struck everyone in the theater like lightning. The audience erupted once more, but this time, it wasn't just applause, it was a roar of compassion, admiration, and love. Even Heidi and Sophia could be seen brushing away tears, their smiles radiant with pride. Cameras zoomed in on Simon, and for once, he didn't try to hide his emotion. His eyes shimmered, and his usual composure cracked into something real and vulnerable. The little girl finally stepped forward, reaching down to touch the golden confetti at her feet, holding a piece in her hand as if it were treasure. She looked up at the judges' table, then toward the audience, her voice barely audible, "Thank you, you've changed my life." In that moment, every person in the theater knew they were not just witnessing a performance, but the transformation of a dream into reality. As the golden confetti settled across the stage, the little girl stood in the spotlight, still trembling with disbelief. She held a handful of shimmering pieces close to her heart as if afraid they might disappear, just like so many dreams she had lost before. The audience had quieted now, not out of disinterest, but because they wanted to hear every word that left her lips. She finally lifted the microphone with both hands and whispered, "Now, my family will never go hungry again." That simple, innocent confession cut straight to the soul of everyone listening. A hush fell over the theater, followed by the sound of muffled sobs from the crowd. Parents pulled their children close, and strangers exchanged glances of deep understanding. Simon lowered his head for a moment, then looked back at her, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You've given us all a gift tonight," he said softly, "but I think the greatest gift is the hope you've given your family, and everyone watching at home." The other judges nodded in agreement, their faces glowing with admiration. The girl smiled through her tears, a smile that radiated both relief and joy, as if the weight of years had finally lifted from her small shoulders. She waved shyly to the crowd, and the audience answered with chants of her name, their voices echoing through the theater like a promise that she would never be forgotten. The cameras captured her standing on that stage, a poor girl who had turned her struggles into something golden, not just for herself, but for every soul who dared to dream despite the odds. And as the lights dimmed, the message lingered in the air: greatness can rise from the humblest places, and even the smallest voice, when fueled by love and hope, can change the world.